G'day, listeners. Today we're joined by Danny Abdeljabbar. He's a former committee person in Elizabeth, New Jersey. He's also one of the hosts of the popular podcast, Bro History. How's it going, Danny?
Chilling, man, as per usual. How about yourself?
You're going well. Good to hear, mate. It would be great to get your perspective today. We normally chat about Brunswick or Melbourne.
Yeah, lots of stuff to talk about. I am obviously not a resident of Brunswick, so probably not going to be talking about anything too local, but hopefully we can talk a little bit about my experience there, in local politics in the U.S. We can probably cover a whole lot of stuff, about U.S. politics, because I am very well versed there. We can talk about maybe some interactions between U.S. politics and Australian ones, maybe get into a little CIA stuff, if you will, and just have some commentary about
those examples to chat about, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so I'm excited to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to My First Party, the podcast where we meet the people rebuilding politics from the ground up. I'm Owen Miller, the convener and candidate for the Fusion Party. With me normally is Peter, who asks the hard questions that major parties don't. So whether you're keen to change the world for the better or just curious to see how others are doing it, this is the podcast for you. So Danny, I guess something very much on people's minds at the moment, all the American sort of shit show politics going on at the moment. I wonder especially, with the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, Trump's supporters turning against him. I wonder what's, in Australia, the Prime Minister can get kicked out by their own party, by the Governor General. Many countries have this option of kicking out their leader in exceptional circumstances. There's such thing as what are the possibilities for the US? Is that possible?
Okay, so you're diving right into the deep end, and you're going to go right for the Epstein list. Okay, yeah, so if we're talking about what are the mechanisms by which the country can push the hard reset button on their elected official, in this case the chief executive for the president, Donald Trump in this case, obviously the only legal ways to do that is through impeachment, right? The other way would be through the 25th Amendment, which is a little bit convoluted, and I'm not really a constitutional historian, so I'm not going to speak to the 25th Amendment route, but the more common way.
Oh, most of our listeners are Australian.
Yeah, so they're probably not going to care either, right? Right? There's special exceptions. You can Google it if you want, but the real way, the only feasible way to remove a president would be through the impeachment proceedings, right? So the House of Representatives, which is the lower representative body in the United States, has to vote to impeach the president. And that has to be.
It has to be an actual crime as well, though, doesn't it? Not just
they introduce articles of impeachment, right, where they say these are the transgressions, right? Because they could be high crimes or misdemeanors against the United States, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be an actual crime. It could just be we collectively agree that the thing that you did isn't befitting of the president, and therefore we'd like to start the proceedings, to remove you. And so in that case. If the majority of the House of Representatives decides that they want to move forward and they impeach the president, which already happened in the last Trump term, then it moves to the upper chamber, so the Senate, right? This is a smaller group of people, and they have to then basically put them on trial. They are the judge, the jury, and the executioner in there, and then they have to vote with a 2/3 majority of the Senate that, yes, indeed, these high crimes and misdemeanors rise to the level of removal of the president. And then that's how you can do it. So effectively what this boils down to is just not very possible, right? Because if you look at U.S. politics, especially today, the margin is very slim, right? We have a slim majority right now of Republicans in both the House and the Senate. Of course, they also have a slim majority in the Supreme Court as well, but this is less of an issue for the impeachment and removal proceedings. And people, especially most of these politicians, are voting really, really along their party line, right? So it's highly unlikely that you're going to get a 2/3 majority of the Senate to say, yeah, let's get rid of Trump on almost any grounds, right? Because U.S. politics is so polarized, And I mean that quite literally. We have a two-party system, right? There is two poles of our government, right? It's so incredibly polarized, especially right now, that getting consensus, even among things that should have been or would have been consensus just a decade earlier, is kind of impossible, right? And that's it's interesting that you bring up Australia's alternative routes for removing your premier, right? So, and this is something that,
I like it,
yeah,
because it's it has, I guess, gone wrong in the past. I
yeah,
wouldn't say
yeah.
that
We'll talk about that, I think.
like, yeah. Well, I guess like when prime ministers have been removed,
Mhm.
I wouldn't completely agree that every situation was warranted.
Yeah.
But actually, yeah, I guess like why I brought up Trump and like the sort of international order is, I guess we have had quite a few episodes recently talking specifically about Brunswick,
Mhm.
a neighborhood within Melbourne, and I think that's not the most interesting topic to everybody. Um,
So you brought on the American to talk about Trump?
well, I guess no. I guess we were saying in the intro as well that Danny, your background in local government
That's
as
right.
well, uh, you know, and I guess like unfortunately, many people in local government, they can't sort of see the forest for the trees.
Sure.
They think, like, oh, Brunswick's very beautiful. How do we get more parks for Brunswick, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But part of, I guess, Brunswick's beauty is because, Australia is a wealthy country, Melbourne is a wealthy place. So, in order to lock this in for generations to come, we need more than just some new parks. We need,
Sure.
policy changes that keep Australia at the forefront
Sure.
of innovation. Or I guess, catch up again now.
Mhm.
Um, but also, I guess why I brought up Trump as well, because it's so we had the federal election here in May,
Okay.
and then so a few months before, one of this political person I met, he was suggesting fusion. My party, fusion has failed. We need to now get someone like Trump or Macron because they won elections. You have to copy one of those two.
Populism.
And I think
Mhm.
all the political people throughout history, and he narrows it down to just these two. These are the, I guess, because like you would have seen plenty of movements over the years
Sure.
that rose up from nothing. I
Mhm.
mean, like Lenin, I'm thinking of is one of the most successful. To start from pretty much nothing to
Mhm.
go to
Also a populist.
creating.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
so I guess is there anyone that comes to mind for you who you would add to the mix?
What of
Um, you
historical
know,
populist?
well, I guess well, they don't have to be populist. I mean, that's what this guy's saying. But
But I
leaders.
actually think that that's kind of an important point and an important distinction because I can only really speak strongly for U.S. politics, but I've got a bit of background in global politics, and what it does seem, at least in today's like political climate across the globe, is
Hmm.
that populism is what wins votes, and that's kind of what's the underpinning of your colleagues, comments towards, hey,
Or
we need.
would Macron, you'd characterize him as a populist as well?
Maybe not Macron. He's probably a bad example in that respect. But populism is on the rise all over the world, right? And populism
Hmm.
can come in many flavors, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a pejorative, right? Like populism just means this is a candidate that represents a popular idea among the people, right? And so generally
Oh,
speaking, that's a good thing. But right now, populism tends to lean towards what is the most politically expedient for an in group,
hmm.
you know? And that's
Well,
how you
I
get a
guess
lot of
yeah.
these fringe characters winning
Well,
elections.
like when you hear populist, I mean, like I hear, sycophant as well, like telling the people what they want to hear as
Sure.
opposed to like what's necessarily the best. I mean, have you been following, so bit of background, Danny and I both used to live in New
Hmm.
York. It's this, the Democrat candidate now, someone named
Mamdani.
Darnie.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so like I saw one of the things he was saying, same as the Greens here, or similar. He was saying, like free public transport, wasn't he?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
It's
and
among
so like
among
it
one of his
sounds.
many promises. Yes. Hmm.
Oh yeah, yeah. A friend of mine said that all the stuff he's promising, it's basically just giving out lots of free stuff, and yeah. But yeah, so like in terms of public transport, for instance, being free,
Hmm.
it sounds good on paper. Like who wouldn't want a free trip? But like you see, the surveys of like, why don't you catch public transport more? That sort of thing. Cost is, maybe like number five on the priorities. The main stuff is like, are there frequent enough services? do the routes go to places I actually want to go, that sort of thing.
Are the buses
And
clean?
so,
Yeah.
yes, we don't have quite that same problem in Melbourne, thankfully.
No, but that's definitely a New York City question, right?
Yeah, it's well, but yeah, it's interesting because like already, I'm pretty sure in most places, yeah, public transport loses revenue. Like the government has to
Sure.
subsidize it. So you can understand how it might not be the most popular thing then.
Hmm.
And so if you're gonna say to the government, like, how about we make it even less appealing for you to spend money on transport because it's going to have to be even more subsidized. So, it's easy to see how this could backfire, that, your free public transport trips could end up meaning, worse services, as quickly as, I don't know, 2, 3 years
Well,
after it
I'll
comes
play
in.
I'll play the devil's advocate. I'm obviously not in New York, so I don't have a stake in the game, but I'll tout that party line a little bit for him, for Mamdani, and saying that, he proposes how to pay for things like, your free buses and, the other more socialist things that he's proposing through heavier taxation, specifically among the wealthiest classes in New York City, right? So he's saying this is going to be, revenue neutral, or, whatever, because we're going to be bringing in more revenues through taxation. Now, you can feel however you want to feel about that, wherever you land on that party line. But, I think it's important to say, if we're going to entertain this idea, we also have to entertain how the proponent of this idea intends to pull it off. And in the case of Mamdani, at least he has a fiscal plan to back his ideas, right? The socialist ideas that he wants, right? So it's not populism in the sense of like, I'm just saying things because I know that the constituents are going to eat it up, and I have no real practical plans to actually go through with it, right? Like, for example, here's a Trump example, right? That we all know and love. We have an immigration problem in the United States. A lot of people are coming in from the southern border. So Trump uses populism and says, everybody's upset about this border issue. Let's fix the border. Let's put up a great wall in the south. And guess what? Mexico is going to pay for it. And, that kind of populist argument, it plays to the ideas that some people in the country want, right? They want to solve the border crisis. And he is being a populist in the sense that he's just saying the things that you want to hear so you can get the votes. But in the negative sense of populism, he's got nothing to back it up, right? The practicality of China, excuse me, not China. I don't know why I'm thinking about China. The practicality of Mexico paying for the wall is like zero, right? Like, that's not going to.
I mean, he argues that, through the extra tariffs and that.
Exactly.
Essentially.
However, if we look at like a Mamdani plan, right, like these free bus services. Now, one thing to point out is that millions of people actually do take and ride the bus and rely heavily on the bus routes. Like, subway system is fantastic in New York City. However, subways don't go everywhere. And the buses can be oftentimes more convenient than that. It's just they cost money. And for working people who may or may not be making the biggest salaries in the world, removing the cost of the public transportation really helps them a lot, right? It helps better these people. And how does he plan to do it? By taxing the rich. Now, again, I want to point out that you can sit on whatever side of that argument that you want, but at the very least, from an intellectual perspective, there is a mechanism by which he could pull that off. Whether or not people will go for it is a different story, right? Whether or not there's ramifications further down the line is a different story. But it's more like you can envision a world where Mamdani gets elected, taxes the rich, and is able to pay for free buses more than you can envision a world where Trump becomes the president and gets Mexico to pay for a border wall, right? So that's why I said earlier, populism doesn't have to be a pejorative, right? It doesn't have to necessarily mean, some sycophant who is just saying what you want them to hear. It's just someone who's saying the things that are on the minds of their constituents, of the voters. And I think, you, Owen, bring up a lot of really good points for the Fusion Party that, if I was in Australia, I would be for. But one thing that I quite like about you as well is that you actually talk about the mechanisms by which to achieve those goals, right? And I think that's that's an important distinction between, sycophant populism and just populism, right? It's okay to be populist, right? But you have to back it up with some substance,
Yeah, thanks for that,
Oh,
Danny.
you're
Yeah,
very
we do
welcome.
have lots of scientists in fusion, and so yeah, like I guess that's our aversion to pure populism. I guess as well though, besides Macron and Trump as like the successful formula for changing things,
Hmm.
I wanted to chat with you about the color revolutions, and I
Okay.
guess like all the so I guess many even Americans, Australians, many of them are unfamiliar with like how involved the CIA has been in toppling governments in the
Sure.
past. Um, and so yeah, I was doing a bit of reading before. Is my characterization, is my assessment correct that a color revolution is like specifically in the downfall of the USSR? Or I guess like people were saying the Arab Spring might count as well.
The Arab Spring would count as that. Also, I would argue that recent Ukrainian color revolutions, like the Maidan revolution in 2014 or the Orange Revolution in 2004, would also be color revolutions. So no, your characterization isn't exactly correct. That it would have to be primarily against the USSR. However, it was popularized and formulated during the Cold War. So I can understand where you would get that. And the majority of these color revolutions that we talk about are during the Cold War period. So a couple of
Also, I guess, yeah, like anyone listening who might think like, I want to change the government,
Mhm.
how would you, what's sort of the recipe here?
Well, who am I in this hypothetical situation? Just out of curiosity, because
Oh,
that
like,
kind of matters, you know.
well, like let's say you're in New Zealand, for instance,
Okay.
and you think like New Zealand government is a bit slow, a bit backwards, and you want, the power to be to the people again.
Oh man, if I'm in New Zealand and
Oh,
I
but I guess I guess more importantly, like what made these revolutions successful, and what do they share in common with each other that they sort of get lumped together?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of color revolutions or grassroots movements, just more broadly, not just color revolutions. A lot of them start with like a
Mm.
common issue, right? Whether you're talking about being against a specific government, like in the cases of like say Chile or Iran, in the 70s, then that's you have a common enemy, something that's wrong in your particular government, and you organize organically to create political change. And different ways that you can do that is like protesting or rioting. It's comes with its varying levels of danger depending on where in the world you are and what time period too, right? But if you're in a place like New Zealand, as an example, where I presume they have freedom of speech and can organize freely, then it becomes a little bit easier for you to exact some change than if you were in places like, say, China, especially modern day China, or Russia, or and any other places that you can imagine, Iran as an example, where they're really going to suppress grassroots movements. So it really just depends, because the devil's here is in the details. Where you are and in what time period you are really will answer your question, right? So I'd give a different answer for New Zealand than I would China, than I would even the United
Oh,
States.
but sorry, I guess like if we think of like the French Revolution,
Hmm.
um, I guess the most famous one versus like these revolutions in Ukraine, Chile,
Hmm.
um, how were they different? Like they were a lot more peaceful, weren't they?
Oof. I mean, we're painting really really broad strokes, so we'd have to hone in on these specifics, right? But if you're asking for
Mm.
what was the same and what was different, what was the same is that a large group of people had some kind of grievance that was in common with one another and decided to get together to do something about it. That's about all that's
Mm.
the same across all of these different color revolutions, because each of them have different flavors, right? Some of them are politically motivated, some of them are culturally motivated. Some of them are backed by organic grassroots initiatives. Some of them, as I think you're willing to point out, are kind of engineered by foreign actors, in many cases the CIA, right? Through soft power methods, right? Through NGOs, through etc. It's really hard to like narrow in on what's the same and what's different if we're not like being specific about which, because there's no smoking gun. There's no like one formula, one theorem to kind of encompass all of grassroots movements.
I guess where I see a big difference, yeah, like as in terms of the CIA,
Hmm.
I mean, I've read as well a bit about the banana republics.
Sure.
I think was it specifically in Costa Rica the CIA managed to overthrow that government, but I guess there's been, it seems to be a pattern
Yeah, I
where
mean,
like
a couple of
they,
places down in South and Central America. I mean, in Chile from 1970 to 1973, there was a socialist that was running the place, Hollande, I think his name was, right?
yeah.
And
Well, he was, I got the impression I wrote a book about him actually. He seemed to legitimately be popular, but then, yeah, the US sanctions and all this led to, essentially the country failing.
right, and
Um,
that's so basically the going assumption, and what many historians will tell you about that is that the CIA didn't like him because he's socialist, and this was like this is to your earlier point about like a lot of these color revolutions started during the Cold War, and so the CIA then uses soft power to initiate change or to like spark change or even covertly support change, right? And so what they do is they do a lot of media propaganda, a lot of funding, a lot of money. Money is a big tool.
yeah, for the
Funding to
opposition groups, yeah.
opposition groups, right? Exactly. And then and sometimes they do economic sabotage, right? To destabilize a country, whether that's like overtly, like through an embargo or like sanctions or something like that, or whether that's covertly by like supporting, fringe and opposition groups. And the goal is always, and especially in Chile, I think I can quote Nixon specifically from the Nixon tapes. It's make the economy scream so that the people have this thing that they're so pissed off about that they're willing to support a change, a broad, big change. And this set the stage for the Pinochet military coup. Basically, at this juncture, by the 1973, the people were just so over the existing government because they didn't understand that the powers that be were manipulating, the situation in the background, And I'm not going to stick up for Salvador Allende either, right? He wasn't a perfect leader either, but point is, it got to a boiling point, and then when Pinochet decided to do the military coup, a lot of the people just kind of went along with it.
Actually, it's interesting that you say that Hollande wasn't sort of everybody's favorite person because I find it really difficult finding out a lot about, especially current events, trying to get through everybody's lens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this particular book I was reading, it was called Cybernetic Revolutionaries,
Okay.
and it was talking about how he had like this cybernetic slant to how he wanted to run the place.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like the author, for instance, she was saying that the cybernetic control room was sexist because of like how the chairs were positioned and all this sort of thing. And like it's hard to. I just want like more of the facts, less of like this weird sort of ideological vibe to everything.
Sure.
And on that note, actually, I would for anyone who hasn't listened to Bro History before, Danny's podcast, Danny, I admire that you and Henry. I mean, yeah, you seem to be like sort of the opposite sides of the political spectrum.
A little bit,
so
yeah.
like it manages to.
Yeah, cards on the
Yeah,
table. I happen to lean left, and to my experience, I was elected as a Democrat in Elizabeth, New Jersey. So, I do have that left-leaning bent. I consider myself an independent today, broadly pretty centrist, but Henry is the complete opposite, right? He came from a strong Republican family, Republican background, very right-wing. Has since moved closer to the center, but still we come at the same issues from different perspectives. And I think what makes our show work and our specific relationship work is that we're able to kind of talk about not only just domestic politics, but also global politics from different backgrounds. And we're able to articulate, our opinions and agree honestly more than we disagree a whole lot. And this is kind of what I hope for. U.S. politics and just broadly politics in general, the ability to be able to talk about things that with people who might disagree with you in a way that's facts based, or at least so far as and in good faith. And I think that's really important. Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, I was trying to do that for this podcast as well. I think
I
you were
noticed,
saying
yeah.
before that. So yeah, when we had the Libertarian on recently, Rachel Verstegen.
My favorite so
like,
far.
some, Peter especially doesn't quite agree with their policies.
That's
but,
Peter.
yeah,
I'm so upset that you're not on the show today because I was really wondering if you were going to shut me down too, or like you were doing to Rachel. But I think we honestly might agree more than we disagree. So,
but yeah, I'm looking forward to having more opponents on the show. But I guess yeah, sorry, back to the what sparks these revolutions and all that.
Sure.
So yeah, we discussed that if the US can make the economy fail, and my understanding is that with the Hollande government, it was a lot of like American companies boycotting, specifically like they were told to do so.
Sure.
But it wasn't as much of an overt thing.
Hmm.
But as well, like on your podcast, you've previously spoken about sanctions. Do
Sure.
they work?
They don't.
What are the motivators?
Yeah. In my
Right,
opinion,
isn't
in
it?
my opinion, they don't, right? The
Well,
sanctions just
because
hurt.
I guess,
Go ahead.
sorry, if we phrase the question as, will this cause enough pain for the civilians that they'll want to overthrow the government? Like, is that indeed what's meant to be happening with the sanctions?
Well, sometimes, but again, devil's in the details, right? So the specifics of who the sanctions are applied to and the conditions that the country that's receiving the sanctions are in already matters a lot, right? So sanctions on a well-established country that has wide access to resources and other trading partners, and might not be in your sphere of influence. Sanctions don't really do a whole lot, right? But for really, really tiny governments that are very heavily reliant on global trade and heavily reliant on your specific sphere of influence, yeah, those sanctions are gonna hurt a lot more, right? So that's why a lot of these sanctions on, say, South and Central American countries, like maybe Venezuela, as an example, really make a strong impact on guiding change. It doesn't always work out, right? And this is why I think Henry and I just generally disagree with sanctions, is because sanctions doesn't hurt the government. Sanctions just hurt the people, right? One way or another, right? And it doesn't necessarily always affect change. And so you have to ask yourself, is the solution sanctions? Is that worth the symptoms, right? The symptoms suddenly become worse than the problem. So I don't know.
Yeah, because I see it. I see it as like an early act of war. I
Hmm.
mean, you see
It's an
it in the
aggressive
lead up
move
to
for
World War.
sure. Yeah.
Well, because as well in the lead up to World War II, I guess to my point before about like learning history, it's unfortunately so biased. I mean, I was at the Hiroshima Nuclear Museum, and they were saying something about how America started World War II, and I thought, are you fucking
Mhm.
Pearl Harbor. But no, like I read about it more.
Mhm.
So the US was imposing all these sanctions on
Yeah.
Japan, specifically about oil.
Mhm.
And I think if they can't buy oil, what do you expect them to do? Of course, and I read more about like spies and that later in the lead up to World War II. There was actually a message that came through to Pearl Harbor. They only read the message at like 1 p.m. or something that said like, the Japanese have given their sort of secret signal. They are about to bomb you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, so the attack happened at like 9 a.m. They read the message in the afternoon. But
Also,
yeah,
Pearl Harbor was far enough away for us to be able to talk about it with like some objectivity, right? But a lot of what I'm about to say you can probably draw some parallels to current events. I'll let you infer those current events yourself, but like I'm not gonna apologize for the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. It was absolutely atrocious. I mean, just think about kamikaze like fighter tactics, like literally dive bombing and killing yourself
oh,
to
that
initiate change. Like that is fucked up.
kamikaze was years later, wasn't it? I thought that's when they were losing the war.
Yeah, I mean, either way, my point is that the bombing of Pearl Harbor, right? About 2,000 or so U.S. servicemen died, lots of property damage, and it was, at least from the outwards perspective, like we didn't do anything physical, right? We didn't. Yes,
Oh,
we were
sorry.
applying sanctions upon Japan, which caused them to be quite agitated with our stance, and they needed that war for their empire building machine. And so they decided to take action against us, right? And that cost American lives. And in that case, I can't apologize for that, right? That's crazy to kill people. However, I can see your point, right? And I can see the point
Oh,
that is
sorry. The point I was trying to make more, sorry, was that many Westerners frame Pearl Harbor as a surprise attack. My point was no, it wasn't a surprise at all. In fact, they knew specifically a few hours before.
yeah, I
And
mean, a few
the
hours before is
US.
still a surprise attack, Owen, though.
Oh, but either way, they made it happen. It was not a surprise for months. I mean, like why was the Navy gathering up there in the first place?
Mhm,
They knew
mhm.
that Japan was going to fight them
Well, so you can
eventually.
ask the same question about, like, say, the invasion of Ukraine, right? So during the invasion of Ukraine, there was a massive buildup of Russian forces on the side, and there you had people saying, "Hey, they're just doing military exercises," and that they were completely wrong. Obviously, you also had people like myself included who assumed that they were just doing this to create a leverage point to say like, hey, look, we've got all these forces on the border, like come to the negotiating table or else, more as like a bluff or a feint, if you will. However, what ends up actually happening in Russia is that they actually do invade, right? And so hindsight being 2020, when we look back at that, we say, well, of course they were going to invade. They had all those forces built up on the border. We can say the same about Pearl Harbor. They might have had signals or intense troop movements, naval deployments, that looked suspicious, right? And here, sitting in 2025, talking about an event that happened like almost 100 years ago, right? Like, yeah, we can turn around and say they had heads up. They knew what was going to happen. But I'm sure that at the time, there were a myriad of opinions about what could have been happening. And the fact that they only got a few hours warning is still a surprise attack. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but sorry, I meant that like when the US imposed the sanctions, at that point, they should have known that like
okay, so that's a different argument that you're making, Owen, which I'm kind of I'm trying to argue for you in that respect. Yes, by applying some sanctions to a country while you're not militarily attacking them or anything like that, you are correct in saying that a lot of these economic sanctions, especially if they're very painful, are tantamount to a war footing, right? They are tantamount to like the opening salvo of a war, just an economic one. And, especially in the case of Japan during the time of their very aggressive empire expansion, they need oil to fuel that expansion. And we hit them exactly where it hurt, right? It hurt them so much that they were willing to kill 2,000 U.S. servicemen to get their point across, right? To do that surprise attack, right? And so, again, very convoluted, very hard to really pin this down, like morality wise, because all of this is immoral in my opinion. The U.S. for one reason or another decided that stopping the Japanese with economic means was preferable to just outwardly fighting with them. Whether or not they understood that this could create blowback, unclear to me because I don't study that specific part of history very well, but I'm sure that at least some people understood that they're going to be pissed off, right? The Japanese are definitely going to be very angry at us, one way or another. Whether or not they actually knew that they were going to strike, again, different talking point. We'd have to do a bit more research, and I'd have to prepare a bit better for that. But again, sanctions usually, like to your earlier point, sanctions are usually one of these, opening salvos. They are poking you in the eye, right? And you should expect that something bad happens if you're going to do something bad to somebody else.
Well, yes. Well, actually, like especially these past few years, I felt so previously, if we didn't like something happening in the world, the options would be, sanctions, straight up war.
Right.
But information warfare. I've seen, the past few years, it seems as though it should have become a lot easier. I'm surprised that we don't see it as much as I would have predicted.
What do you mean?
Well, so ever since, the World Wide Web became a thing, late 90s, early 2000s, I would have thought like, let's say we want, regime change in Iran, for instance. They have very severe sanctions at the moment. Another option I would have thought, could have been like, let's spread, essentially propaganda in Iran. But then I guess maybe you have the same experience. I was at some sort of public, that's right. I was at a comedy show recently, and one of the comedians asked, put your hands up if you watch Maths, Married at First Sight. And yet most of the crowd put their hands up, and thinking, oh my goodness, like no wonder, there's never going to be any sort of misinformation against these people. They don't listen to anything political. They listen to just...
I think you're making your own point against why hasn't there been more information warfare? There's like a lot of reasons for that. Yeah,
is that why? Is it that
that's definitely
so many people
that's definitely part of it. I think only very recently are we, as a collective society globally, utilizing the internet as a source for information that's more important than, say, traditional media sources. Right? Just before social media and getting all your news on Twitter or Reddit or wherever you get your news, right? Before that, it was TV, right? Cable news and local news and things like that. So people were watching the TV, and that's how the misinformation was spread. And as I'm sure is the case in Australia, in the United States, the TV has already very much been co-opted by special interest groups and different propaganda forces, and I can imagine probably also by the alphabet, 3-letter agencies all over. My point is that it wasn't until very recently that we all started really focusing in on the internet as a source of information, which is why you start seeing things like a potential TikTok ban happening in the United States, because there's this like fear that China is injecting propaganda into the feeds of our young people, and they're going to eventually become voters, and that's a bad thing or whatever, as if we're not already doing that all over the world in other media formats, right? Before the TV, let me just finish this point real quick because it's important. Before the TV, it was the newspapers. And importantly, one of the biggest color revolutions in Iran was started because Kermit Roosevelt bought a newspaper in Iran and started printing a bunch of anti-government propaganda, right? And people were reading that source of news. This is a CIA guy, right?
That was in order to install the Shah.
Exactly, right? So to get rid of Mossadegh, they basically started buying up media inside of the newspaper media inside of the country, and then start printing a bunch of like anti-Mossadegh shit, just like a lot of it, right? And people are reading it because that's the method that they're getting their information from. So yeah, it works. Information like warfare is an effective means, but it's also really dirty means, because the effectiveness of information warfare is better for misinformation than it is for straight up information. You can't just it feels like, this is my opinion, I don't have any statistics on this, but it feels like if you present someone with the cold hard facts, the truth about something, they are less likely, people are less likely to be swayed by the cold hard truth than they are by misdirection or by misinformation or something salacious, And so even information warfare, I think, is kind of like morally impermissible to affect change, because, it's almost going to be ineffective if you're doing it with the truth. It seems like an uphill battle, a Sisyphean, rolling the rock up the hill,
Yeah, actually, I wonder on that point. Actually, a few people in Fusion disagree with me on this point. Maybe Peter will as well. But I would regard misinformation warfare. I think that we can easily say that that's the most legitimate form of warfare, can't we? I mean, it's more morally superior to killing people or to sanctions, isn't it?
Sure, but in all situations.
Well, because can we go further and say that not only is it morally superior to killing people, but it's actually morally fine? If you tell someone, so if we think about Australia, for instance, if you say that, Anthony Albanese is secretly 2 children in a trench coat, you can't vote for him because of that. If they believe it, did they deserve to vote in the first place? If you say that, Anthony Albanese is part of some sort of secret child pedophile cabal, and they just believe it, again, does this person even deserve to vote? If they're living in some sort of bizarre parallel universe simulation, if they don't actually understand their country, if they don't know, facts from fiction, then why are they having a say in the future of our country?
Well, okay, I'm going to dip my toe into philosophy for a bit. I haven't done any philosophy since undergrad, and that was like a very long time ago, but I'm going to call up...
It's more than most people,
I'm going to call up Kant here, and I'm going to try and paraphrase this or quote it directly. He says, act upon the maxim whereby you can will it a universal law. In other words, something is morally permissible if you can envision everyone being able to do it universally, right? So something like stealing couldn't be moral, because if everyone universally stole everything, then the very concept of ownership of anything goes out the window. Therefore, there's nothing to steal. Therefore, that's not a universal maxim. Same thing with disinformation or information warfare. Yes, you make an interesting case. I don't know if I agree with it, but you make an interesting case that, if people are able to, be fooled by the fact that, your politician is 2 kids in a trench coat, right? Fair game. You couldn't do that universally, right? Because if everything was misinformation, then the very concept of information as a whole is invalid, right? Nothing matters, right? Plus, also, I'm not sure about Australia, but in the United States, libel laws exist, right? So you can't just straight up lie knowingly and to an affected change. That is actually against the law in the United States. I don't know if there's a comparable law.
Yeah, there's you can sue people for defamation, and actually one of the things about so the Fusion Party, we want to make a whole bunch of reforms about whistleblowers in particular. So one of the hurdles for this is the defamation laws. If you if you leak, secrets about someone, for instance, it's very easy for them to sue you for defamation. The payouts can be huge, and yeah, like it's many people who are just hearing about this might think, well, fair enough. If this person spreads, bullshit rumors about me, I should be able to sue them. But in Australia, it seems to be like especially easy to sue for this, especially easy for the person to win the defamation suit.
Who's the burden of truth on in the in Australia?
Well, I guess it would be the same anyway. That so one of the defenses is that it's true. But so one example, for instance, there was a famous case recently in Australia about this political employee he was accused of raping another political employee, and so he was found not guilty in a criminal trial, and then he sued a newspaper or someone for saying that he was a rapist. But then he lost that civil case because they have like a lower burden of proof than the criminal cases.
Right.
But in terms of my point that the defamation cases are too easy to win, so there was a case with Rebel Wilson, for instance, the actor. So it was revealed by Woman's Day, an Australian magazine, that she had been lying about her age, saying that she was maybe 6 years younger than she actually was.
Okay, so
but Rebel Wilson won this case for defamation.
Oh, really?
Even though she was lying about her age, and so like it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like how did?
Well, the implications of that are kind of terrible, right? Because if the burden of proof is so like soft here that you could win an anti-defamation case even though you were wrong, then that kind of brings up some issues about like speaking truth to power, right? So
yeah, exactly. And so that's why it's hard on the whistleblowers. Yeah,
exactly. And it seems that here in the United States we're facing a little bit of issues with this as well. I don't know if you've recently heard about the Colbert scandal, Stephen Colbert.
Oh, yeah, what happened? So the show ended, but people are saying that he was forced out.
Yeah, so, okay, not super well-versed on this, but I'll give you the TLDR. Basically, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert is owned by Paramount, right? And Paramount recently had a lawsuit against with Donald Trump that they settled for $16 million because of a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris that Donald Trump claims was edited to make him look bad, right? Or edited to make her look good. Either way, they argued that was election interference because they were messing with the format of the interview and making her look better, right? Yeah, so he sues Paramount, and Paramount settled with him for $16 million, which is no small amount of money. But the reason why they settled with him is because he is the president of the United States, and they're looking to do a merger with a company called Skydance, right? And his government was basically blocking the merger happening between Paramount and Skydance, right? And that turned into a little bit of a debacle. So it's looked at as almost like a political bribe that the $16 million that Paramount paid him the settlement of $16 million. And as a result, now they feel that they can't cross Donald Trump. And Stephen Colbert is a large, he's
very left-leaning.
Right, and he's also, he doesn't pull any punches against Trump. And specifically, a couple days before the show got canceled or was announced to have been canceled, Stephen Colbert had started talking shit about Paramount. He's like, calling it like a spade and saying like, this is clear.
Oh, he knew what was coming, you reckon?
Well, maybe. I'm not entirely certain about that. But, most people in the United States go under the belief that, it's free speech. You can say whatever you want and you're not going to have any repercussions for it. until they find out that there are some repercussions to your speech, you know? In any case, he starts calling out Paramount, the people who own his show, you know, and calling it what it is. It looks like a political bribe so that they can get favor with the president. And then a couple days later, it's canceled. Now, what's interesting about it being canceled was that The Late Show is the #1 rated show for like late night TV, right, in the United States. Okay. So it's actually the #1 rated show, but it gets canceled, and the official reason is for money reasons or financial reasons. Apparently, they were losing tens of millions of dollars every year on the production, which is actually might be true, right? But it raises a lot of suspicion about whether or not, you know, with the timing at all. Stephen Colbert starts talking shit about this, you know, lawsuit, and a couple days later, the executives at Paramount decide that he's, you know, that show will no longer be a show next year. And so, you know, it's really interesting. What's even more interesting is, did you see the new South Park episode? Also a Paramount.
Well, I haven't watched that for a bit, but yeah, I heard that was very disparaging about
Donald
Trump.
Man,
Wasn't he,
talk about it, disparaging.
That they portrayed him as the devil?
No. Okay, so this one's even funnier. So South Park is also owned by Paramount, right? Which makes this whole thing even juicier. South Park, as you know, is a very, you know, contrarian, very, very, like, you know, out there kind of show, and they really don't pull their punches.
It's amazing they haven't been cancelled after all.
Well, actually,
these years.
the two the people who founded the show, Matt and Trey, they literally they're on the record by saying, like, the only way South Park is going off the air is if someone forces it off the air, which I think might actually be the case pretty soon. So they just recently signed a deal with Paramount for $1.5 billion, right? To renew for the next, I think it's to renew for 5 more years and have 50 more episodes. So 10 episodes a season, right?
Yeah, wow.
So they literally just skirted this deal, got it signed on the dotted line. But the thing is that they were having beef with Skydance, the company that's supposed to try and merge with Paramount. And they really, really didn't like them, and they really don't want this happening. So what they did was sneakily get the deal done with Paramount, and literally the day that it's got signed, they released the episode that night. I think they might have timed this perfectly, right?
Oh, I see. So Skydance couldn't kill it. Yeah.
Right. So now they have signed contract for the next 5 years and $1.5 billion, right? And they've released this episode, which, holy shit, Owen. First of all, Donald Trump is played in the same way as Saddam Hussein was played in the movie for South Park. It's like a regular face, but that it does like the funny funny flappity head.
They do the same ones for the Canadians, don't they?
Correct, but they don't use like a real face. They don't like use like a picture face. They use like drawings for them. So it's
but I mean, you know, drawing it in that way isn't necessarily insulting. But
right, so it's actually Donald Trump's face in a bunch of different like whatevers, and he's flapping his head, and that part's fine, right? Like totally fair game. But then, yes, he is having a sexual relationship with Satan, which is interesting. There are multiple references to him having a small penis, and they even show his small penis animated on the show, right? And his tagline is like, "I'm gonna sue you. I'm gonna sue you," right? Like he's constantly saying he's gonna sue somebody, and they're literally like baiting Trump to sue them, because this really fucks Paramount, because, you know, maybe they get sued for libel or defamation or something like that. But I think this is all in fair use when it's satire, right? A lot of people have tried to sue South Park and failed because it is political satire, right? They're just making jokes, right? Nobody thinks that they're serious. Nobody thinks that anything that they say is true, even though a lot of it is. And so they might get pulled off the air. We're testing the bounds of free speech in the United States here with cartoons, apparently. But
I'm uneasy about the small penis thing, though. It's a double because, like, you know, so if Donald Trump, for instance, says that who's that woman he hates, Roseanne?
Rosie O'Donnell. Yeah, Rosie
O'Donnell. So, like, if he says, you know, Rosie O'Donnell is fat and ugly, you know, many people,
he has,
you know, that's
exactly
right. So many people think, like, you know, that's you know, that's immoral, you know, to be like objectifying a woman, especially a woman, in this way. You know, women cop a lot of criticism about, you know, their looks, their weight, that sort of thing. So if we say that it's wrong for him to say Rosie O'Donnell is fat and ugly, and yet, well, shouldn't it also be, unsatisfactory for people to say, oh, here's a small penis, so that's some sort of something to be ashamed about. Like, you can't help.
Yeah, I mean,
what your body
you
is.
could make that case, Owen. You could. I don't know where I fall on this particular argument, because because personally, and this is my hypocrisy here. Personally, the South Park bit is funny.
It's not something that you're familiar with. The phenomenon.
Yeah. The South Park bit is funny, whereas the comments that Trump has for Rosie O'Donnell just seem in like bad faith or bad spirit, right? There's nothing funny about what he's saying about her, so I treat them differently, even though that might be a little bit hypocritical. But I mean, it really comes down to where you stand for free speech, right? And also, oftentimes people are presented with a false choice. The false choice is either you are a free speech absolutist, meaning any and all speech goes, or you are not for free speech. You are for some kind of limited speech, right? And I think that false choice is a false choice. I think there exists a gray zone in between. I think, broadly speaking, free speech is something that should be enjoyed by all human beings. But there should be some reasonable controls around what free speech goes. In particular, straight up defamation with the intent to harm is something that I think should be looked at, right? And you could probably make the argument that South Park is intending to harm the president, but I guess they'd have to adjudicate whether or not it was an effectual attack on Trump, and whether or not he actually had damages due to this, because probably not, right?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. When we were talking before about, like, would the US ban TikTok? I guess when it comes to all this misinformation, especially about the US,
Right.
it reminds me a lot of that saying from Napoleon, wasn't it? Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake.
I think that's Sun Tzu, but I could be wrong about that. Isn't that The Art of the War?
Yeah, sorry, I think
The Art of War?
Yeah. But I guess, either way, it's like, why do you have to make up, things the US are doing? The stuff that they're already doing is bad enough.
Well, I think what's interesting about South Park is that they very poignantly reflect the zeitgeist of the United States in their episodes. And they're actually quite fast about it, right? When they animate these episodes and ideate on them, it's like literally down to the week of what's happening. And
the writers are very on point.
Yeah, it's a social commentary, and so it's not necessarily. I don't believe that the impact is trying to hurt Trump in any way. I think the impact is trying to point out the hypocrisies and pitfalls of domestic U.S. politics as it stands currently. You can argue it's in bad faith, and I would probably agree with you, right? You can argue that it's funny and satire, and I would also agree with you. I hold a very nuanced opinion about Salesforce. Why I got Salesforce? South Park. A very, very nuanced opinion about South Park. I'm sure if they were doing things against me, specifically, like if Bro History got big and popular, and then suddenly they did episodes about me.
You guys were already #1 in Azerbaijan or something?
Yeah, we still are actually #1 podcast in a history podcast in Azerbaijan. That's right.
Yeah, nice. I should say as well to our listeners, Danny has been very helpful in helping My First Party get going. Lots of tips so far. I guess we did promise in the first episode that it would be sort of more introspective, trying to give more tips to other people how to get their organizations off the ground, that sort of thing. Actually, and on that point, actually, Danny, changing topics a bit. So you served in local government, as with your mother. Can we talk about that for a bit? How did you what motivated you? Was it your mother who had the idea first? What happened there?
It's super interesting that you bring this up, and I do want to preface this by saying, you're probably not going to get a very inspirational story out of this, because my experience with the local government wasn't exactly positive, and not for any nefarious reasons, but just because it was a little microcosm of the things that I disliked, right? But nevertheless, I'll tell you about the story, right? So to answer your question directly, we knew a few people in our city, the city of Elizabeth, New Jersey, in the United States, and we were informed that seats were opening up for our local committee people. In Elizabeth, New Jersey, the city is divided into 6 wards and then further subdivided into multiple like election districts, right? You can think of this as like a really tiny municipal microcosm of like broader, politics. And basically in each district, they need 1 male and 1 female to represent that district in the committee, right? And this position is basically like a volunteer firefighter, but for politics, right? You don't get paid. It's very like low touch, right? You're not like meeting constantly or anything like that, but you are part of like the so-called grassroots movements, right? You're on the ground floor of politics and you're representing a number of people. In my case, I think there was about 5,000 people in my specific district, right?
You and your female partner,
who happened to be my mother, right? So it's funny about that because I had always been interested in politics, and I was like, well, this is an interesting opportunity. Nobody was running on the Democratic side. There was a few people running on the Republican side, but Elizabeth is largely liberal. So I was like, hey, this is a real chance to win here. Like I'm part of the big party here. Funny story about that. Our ballot is super long. There was probably 15 different like positions, and it goes from like mayor all the way at the top, all the way down to like my positions. And because they sorted each individual tier alphabetically, my name comes on top of my mother's name, right? So it's I'm number 13 and she's number 14 on the ballot, and she ends up getting 2 more votes than I did. It's like someone actively skipped my name and then went to my mom's name and chose her twice more.
It's good that people are actually doing some sort of thought, whether or not. Yeah,
well, but we weren't running against each other, right? We were running with each other. Like we're both getting the votes. So someone two people actively skipped my name, which I thought was hilarious.
With that long ballot, actually, we have in Australia, especially for the Senate, there can be, I think there's 30 or so parties. And people like regularly say, oh, it's a tablecloth. And I think,
yeah.
Be careful what you wish for. do you really want fewer parties?
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. No. But so we ultimately get elected, right?
So you won. Yeah.
Yeah, we win. Landslide. The Republicans didn't win in our district. That wasn't a surprise. And basically the purpose of these committee people are to help endorse specific candidates, like including for like city council, mayor, school board, things like that. Sometimes that we get organized into like subcommittees, although I never was invited to one and I didn't actively try and join one. And we vote on things like ballot placements. Like if there's an initiative that is, being proposed to go onto a ballot, we're pretty much the first vote to say like, yeah, we want to put this on the ballot, right? The thing that I didn't like about that part was that we didn't get to choose the things that we voted on. Those choices were brought to us. We voted on the choices and then they go off, right? So we didn't have any say in like if I wanted a new park, I think you were joking about that, right? Yeah. If I really wanted a new park for my district, I couldn't go into this meeting and say like, hey, we need a new park, that was off the table, right? It was mostly grassroots movements. We were doing a lot of canvassing, a lot of get out the vote efforts, things like that. And ultimately what it boiled down to was like very irregular meetings, at least annually, but there was a couple like specific events that we had to attend, or that they were not mandatory. Like they're not paying us. We don't have to go if we don't want to at all. But what I noticed at these meetings was that like, even though I was at the most micro level of politics in the United States, it felt just like the big league politics. Like it had all of the trappings, all of the drama. It felt more like high school popularity contests. And like, it was very inefficient and very ineffectual, and it turned me off. And even though the city of Elizabeth was largely Democratic, it had fractures within it, right? So there was the wing of the party that supported like the politics of the mayor and the sheriff, and then there was the wing of the party that supported like the Board of Education, and they would fight like cats and dogs, and oh man, the things that they would bring up for votes would be like, you can follow the string and see, oh, this proposal for a rezoning benefits directly the cousin of, the councilman who has a specific business that this is going to help, and it was just very, it's very stupid. Yeah. It really turned me off to politics. I'm not going to lie.
Well, because when we talk about like it feels like grassroots at the start. Reminds me, I was chatting. So last week I was chatting with the Greens councillor, and so one of the things that's become popular in Australian politics lately is the idea that, the candidate and all their volunteers should go around door knocking every house, basically introducing themselves. And what it seemed to be very very effective for the teal candidates, basically quote unquote independents. Don't want to get into that debate now, but that they were meant to, like, it was meant to be a grassroots thing where they served the community, and specifically they didn't have policies, but people voted for them anyway because they were saying, listen to you, you tell us basically what you want to happen. And so this proved effective when they were door knocking because, like, they were actually listening. They didn't have policies. They were getting told what to do.
Sure.
And then so other parties tried to replicate it. But of course, parties, especially for the Fusion Party, we formed because these are the sorts of ideas we like. People join voluntarily because they agree with those policies. And so, when parties are going out, they can pretend to listen. They can't listen as much because, they already have some things agreed upon.
Right. They already have a platform. And so the listening part might not jive well with what they're hearing, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like, what this person says, like, sure, you can, like, write it down as feedback, but it's just not going to get as far.
It's not going to go anywhere.
And so, well, yeah, so I was trying to pressure my Greens friend to elaborate on this point, because they visited like 60,000 homes, more than half the electorate of 100,000 people, and yet they got like a 3% or whatever swing towards them. And same as when I hear about like all the drama in your level, it's like they say it's grassroots. That's what sort of draws people in, but then it turns out like, oh, this is just it's what do you call it, a cargo cult. They're just replicating the appearance of what's meant to work.
Right.
But then I guess on a more positive note, though, going back to we were talking about the revolutions before and the CIA stuff, because like they never, like, when they're trying to change the government, they always call it cargo cult or whatever, they always want that appearance of legitimacy. They never, like, has there ever been a US example, for instance, where they say, or I guess only after World War II, would they directly kick someone out and say, this is your new leader, we're installing him, you just follow his orders now? Like, ever since World War II, it's always been like, they're trying to give legitimacy to these new leaders by saying, look, they're supported by the people. I mean, even I was listening to a podcast about the early days of the Afghan war, and there are all these CIA operatives visiting, local warlords, counting, okay, if they have 500 troops, okay, then we'll support them. It has to be like a local uprising. It can't just be US goes in and kills people.
Right. Right.
It's, yeah, like, is that assessment correct, by the way, that, in all these, ever since World War II, there's always an attempt to make it seem more local and legitimate?
Well, I think this is a bit of a chicken and the egg, right? Because there are quite a few grassroots or color revolutions or whatever you want to call them that spring up through the covert actions of foreign entities or even local entities, right? So special interests, we can call them. Yes, there's a lot of them that are not actually grassroots and that they're promoted to look like grassroots. So in that respect, yes, for those that we're speaking about, there are many. But there are many actual local grassroots initiatives that spin up all on their own that are then later co-opted by some of these things. Ones that come to mind are like the Arab Spring, right? That actually did grow organically out of Tunisia.
Yeah.
Right? That wasn't a CIA plant. That just happened, right? People were mad about shit. And then suddenly the CIA is like, oh, well, we can make a war out of this. We can destabilize the region.
It gets hijacked.
Right.
Oh, but actually, in terms of the protests getting hijacked, like I heard that many, like in Iran, for instance, many people are upset about the government, but they're very skeptical about any sort of grassroots uprising because they are so skeptical. Like, is this going to get hijacked, or is it already just a false flag by the US?
I mean, Iran has a specifically interesting position because they were already the victim of this, right? Operation Ajax in 1953 was basically CIA staged and funded a fake popular uprising, right? And I think to a certain extent, you know, this became a blueprint for a lot of future operations that looked like this. And to a certain extent, even further, I think Netanyahu and the Israeli government were trying to effect a change through maximum pressure on the government by bombing the shit out of them, right? So they thought we're gonna hit not just Tehran and not just Natanz and not just Fordo, but we're gonna hit everywhere, and we're gonna do internal explosions, and we're gonna hire MEK assassins to kill people or do car bombs and stuff like that, and just make absolute chaos in Iran, such that people get so upset and angry at what's going on that they're willing to do an uprisal. I think this is evidenced not only just in a lot of the evidence that you see on the ground, but also just the name of that operation was Operation Rising Lion, right? And a lot of people seem to speculate that the Rising Lion in this is just a call out to the former flag of Iran back when it was, with the monarchy, because it had a lion on it, right? And so they're trying to get the lions to rise back up. And you got people like the Shah's son, the prince or whatever his name is.
It's insane listening to that guy. Yeah. Does he actually believe that he has a chance?
I don't know, but like the Shah was wildly unpopular, right? And primarily because he was an installation by the United States, So, yeah, I mean, Iran, I think it kind of had this latest tiff had a bit of an opposite effect. Yeah, I think there's probably a large percentage, maybe even a super majority of people in Iran who are very upset with the Islamic Republic and don't want them to be part of it. But they're equally afraid of creating kind of this like Syria type situation, right? Where, we have an overthrow of the government, and then now you have all of these vying parties. Because remember, Iran's not a monolith of Persians, right? The demographic makeup of Iran is quite broad. It has, not obviously a bunch of Arabs and a bunch of Persians. You have Kurds. You have just so many different ethnic groups in the same thing. Then each of them are kind of vying for their own sets of power as well. It could turn into a warlord situation, right? Like. Not to mention there's probably still elements of the IRGC that would splinter off and become like a Hezbollah group, if you will. It could be a nightmare for them. So they're kind of afraid, like they're like, we don't like these guys. But also the alternative kind of sucks too, because we're looking at, recent historical evidence of like destabilization in Middle Eastern countries come with a lot of baggage, like a lot.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up Israel. One of the things I wanted to discuss with you, Danny, you would have heard of John Mearsheimer,
yes.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. So for listeners, so John Mearsheimer is famous for what's it called? Attacking realism.
Yeah. Oh man, it's on the tip of my tongue.
Instead of defensive, offensive realism.
Offensive realism. Yeah, that's the one.
So to summarize, like his policy. So there was this quote. He's American. We had four potential peer competitors in the 20th century: Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union. We helped contain and defeat all four of them. We helped put all four of them on the scrap heap of history. Mm-hmm. So he's talking about basically potentially hegemonic powers. Sure. It makes sense for them to bully everybody else to make sure that they're the only hegemonic power. Mm-hmm. And so we were saying that, the US loves, even if it is going to try overthrowing a government, it wants to at least give the facade of legitimacy. Versus with Israel just like bullies whoever it wants to. It seems they don't. There's no pretense about it. Yeah, I mean the pager attacks, that sort of thing. There's no subtlety at all. And so, are we entering a new era? Like, what if the US adopts the same approach? Like, everybody found out our covert attempts. There are all these leaks now, Edward Snowden, all the stuff that was leaked to Julian Assange. Mm-hmm. Can the US actually pull off any covert operations anymore? And is there any point? Should the US just be brazen about it, like annexing Canada, for instance?
No, they shouldn't. But shouldn't or will is a different question.
Oh, I mean, in terms of should, I mean, like, by game theory, does it make sense?
Yeah. Fair. I just want to disagree slightly with your assessment that the U.S. can't make covert actions. I think there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that we know about U.S. foreign intervention that is covert, that ends up leaking either through methods like Snowden or Assange, or later declassification. I mean, we find out through like official channels that we've messed with countries all the time, right? I wouldn't underestimate the United States' ability to impact like foreign nations covertly. I wouldn't. It's going to happen. There's plenty of power there.
There's so much more effort. I mean, it's a much more difficult operation to pull off if you're going to do it covertly.
Sure, but there's there is a national interest in creating and having plausible deniability for to affect change, right? Like we can't, with the exception of just recently using B-2 bombers to bomb the shit out of Iran's nuclear facilities, we can't just go around the globe unilaterally pounding people, like Israel has been lately. I know that.
Well, look what happened to Israel, though. I mean, in the Australian elections in May, that was a talking point for months and months.
Sure.
The Israel-Palestine stuff, and yet at the end of the day, the same government was re-elected.
Sure.
Like the voters proved that actually they don't care all that much about genocide. They're willing to keep voting for the same people.
To what extent, though, are they being misled, right? Remember, we were talking earlier in this conversation about the impact or the effectiveness of misdirection or misinformation at gaining popular opinion, right? It's not like a secret that the Israeli government has like the process of hasbara, right? The idea that they inject their own propaganda into their media, and any media that goes against the propaganda of the Israeli state is silenced, like legally speaking. Like they can shut you out. It's the reason why you don't have outlets like Al Jazeera, as an example, reporting directly from within Israel, because they say no, right? Like they remove you.
Oh, they get blocked.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's within a legal framework too. They're allowed to do this, right? They're allowed to do.
Do they have all the Do they have all the VPNs like China does? Do the Israeli citizens do this?
Yeah, I mean, it's to be clear, they're blocking that media from happening within their government, within their state.
Oh, they're not blocking the website.
Yeah,
okay.
They're not like stopping the Israelis from getting their news from other outlets that might be telling the truth. But it all comes down to what's easy, right? I mean, to a certain extent, people still watch TV, right? Like boomers are still a thing, right? And they're still getting their news from their regular TV programs. And those TV programs within, you can't get unless you have like internet TV and all kinds of, fancy things that the boomers aren't going to understand. They're getting their media, their primary consumption of media, from Israeli outlets in Israel. And if it's not from the television and the newspaper, and we're talking about social media, they're consuming social media in their native language, which is more often going to be tinged by, the hasbara, the ideas that are being promoted by the state, right? And this is like, they have a legal framework for this, right? I'm not agreeing with it. I think it's terrible, but, legally speaking, they're allowed to do this. They're allowed to propagandize their population. So the idea that, okay, now their electorate has the people of Israel are all genocidal maniacs because they all decided to vote for Netanyahu again, or whatever the argument that you're trying to make there could be. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think that the majority of people, normies everywhere, are very, very misinformed. I think they're very heavily propagandized, and I think they're victims in that own respect to their own propaganda. I still think it's morally objectionable, right? I still think it's really hard in the 21st century, in 2025, for you not to be able to see like the what amounts to a genocide in Gaza, and what amounts to just flagrant, offensive attacks on Syria, on Lebanon, on Iran, on their perceived enemies.
It's so obviously genocide. I guess. Sorry, you're speaking more about like what are the internal, within Israel implications for being a morally horrendous government. I'm saying more like internationally. So like Australia doesn't, has taken a very long time to condemn Israel in any sort of way. And yet the Australians still re-elected this Australian government,
I
despite all
see.
the
I see. Okay,
protests.
I misunderstood what you were saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an
If Israel,
that's an interesting
if
dynamic.
they can get
That is a more, I think, a more interesting dynamic than the inside of Israel dynamic, because that part I can actually see a bit more clear, because they're very clearly being propagandized, like very heavily, right, and legally speaking,
yeah.
right? But outside, you're right.
Or
Why?
the other Middle Eastern countries, they were, threatening for, how long was Iran threatening? They had, the groups in Lebanon, for instance, they were supporting the Houthis as well. And remember, in the early days of this recent war, Iran and the proxy groups were making threats for months. Don't do anything worse, or we'll fire tens of thousands of rockets.
Right.
They never did. They got wiped out by the Patriot attacks. It all amounted to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, the richer Middle Eastern countries, they didn't do anything.
Well, I'll correct you a little bit on the
Egypt,
Hezbollah front. Hezbollah did fire several thousands of rockets into northern Israel, especially in the beginning of the war, right? Hezbollah did.
didn't that amount to not much though?
Well, the outcomes and the intentions are two different conversations to have. I think the intention and what they actually did was they did go out eventually and fairly quickly to support, the Gazans by attacking Israel in the north. For many months, the people of Israel were removed or evacuated from the north of Israel for safety reasons, right? It wasn't until like pretty recently that they are allowed to go back, right? So Lebanon and more specifically Hezbollah has gotten into fights. But you're right on the Iranian side, and you're right. Syria has been in a civil war situation for a really long time, so I would count them out entirely.
Yeah.
But yeah, Iran for months was saying like, hey, don't do that, or whatever, right? And they've been just supporting proxy groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis and things like that to get their their attacks in. But that was more out of necessity, because Iran was never prepared really to take on the full weight of the United States, and ultimately that's what happened to them. But yeah, they
also, yeah, if we see like all the, I guess, people who we would think of as like, being sort of more religiously tied to the Palestinians, more ethnically tied to the Palestinians, if they sort of put up with it and say, not my problem. And
you're talking about like Gulf states and stuff like that,
Yeah. And then, like if people in Australia who want to take the moral high ground, if even in Australia, like that's not the way the elections go, that we don't take the moral high ground in our elections, then I guess doesn't that go to like John Mearsheimer's point that like, why wouldn't you just be a bully? Why try to hide it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right? It sends a signal to bad actors, that if their bad actions don't go unpunished, that they can continue to do it. I think that's part of the reason why they've, pretty flagrantly attacked Iran just a couple of weeks ago, right? Because they realized like no one's stopping us, and we have, yeah, we're catching a lot of flack, with words, but no one's like actually doing anything about it. So who cares? Let's take our shot. Let's shoot our shot right now, because it's in our national interest to weaken Iran's nuclear program. And they took the shot. And then the U.S. ended up backing them up physically with bombers, right? I digress, though.
Yeah.
You're right to say, why did Australia vote in the same party, right, that basically did nothing against this war? And unfortunately, what it comes down to is that it's not Australia, right? Israel and Gaza is not Australia, right? Yes.
Well, there is it's unfortunate that many people in Australia don't fully understand our connection. I mean, you'll see so one of the demands being made against me, many voters obviously asked, what are you going to do, Israel Palestine, for instance. One of the demands was that Australia must stop selling arms to Israel. And I heard rumors on both sides. I mean, my understanding was that Australia probably doesn't sell at least significant quantities of arms to Israel. Our main involvement is that we're part of the global supply chain for the F-35. Yeah. And then also, of course, we host Pine Gap.
Oh, let's talk about Pine Gap. Oh, that's an interesting one.
I'm so surprised. Even I hope I haven't woken my housemate, but even chatting with various Americans, like they haven't even heard of Pine Gap.
That's fascinating story. Yeah.
Well, most Australians don't understand the importance of it either. I mean, they've heard that there's a US military base there. They don't realize that it's serving half, like, all the US satellites for half the time, half the day.
Yeah.
Danny, do you want to, you could probably best explain to our listeners, like, the importance of all this.
Yeah, I mean, Pine Gap is such an interesting thing. I actually had to go back and reread some of the stuff about Pine Gap because it's so fascinating. Set aside the stuff that I'm super interested in, like the UFO sightings and all the fun woo-woo shit like that. Putting that part,
All of that is,
putting that part aside, Pine Gap is basically a U.S. installation, even though it's supposed to be jointly operated by the Aussie armed forces as well. But it's like in the actual center of Australia.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's like not
to be furthest from the
right.
sea.
It's
Yeah,
nine.
furthest from
It's over 900 kilometers away from any water. Right. It's like you can't get any farther inland. This is where all the most dangerous snakes live. I actually looked it up.
Oh, I guess,
Yeah,
I guess so.
it's where all the most dangerous shit in Australia lives. Anyway, so they build this, top secret U.S. Australians officially signal intelligence base. It is a signal intelligence base. It was for Cold War surveillance, but I'm sure they're doing some other shit there too that we'll never know about, right? Or maybe we will at some point. I don't know. And the interesting part about this, and this is kind of tying in a lot of our conversations, is that your prime minister at the time in the 1970s. Okay, I'm going to butcher his name because I've never heard it spoken out loud. Whitlam. Is it Goj? Goff with like an F sound at the end.
Yeah,
What
exactly.
kind of a name
So
is
he was talking
Goff?
about. That's not as common anymore.
Is that a common
But yeah,
name?
he was talking. No, it would not. You'd sound like an old person. But I guess he was talking about maybe evicting them, wasn't he?
Yeah. So okay, Goff, right? I'm not an expert on Australian politics, so correct me if I say anything that's kind of off. But the things that I do know about this particular story is that yes, Whitman's government he officially threatened to expose or shut down Pine Gap, which obviously alarmed the U.S. and at large the CIA because they're using this as an operations base.
This was it during the Vietnam War?
Yes, because Whitlam was staunchly against the Vietnam War. And a couple of other things on that Vietnam War. He also he recognized China. What was the other things? He wanted to pull
Just
out
a few months. Yeah.
He wanted to pull out the troops, I believe it was. I'm getting a lot of my Vietnam history is not super solid, but I know that he was basically staunchly opposed to everything that was in the U.S. national interests, and there was also a lot of he had a lot of suspicions among a lot of Australians, I imagine, that ASIO, your CIA equivalent in Australia,
ASIO, yeah.
ASIO, that it basically was co-opted or what's the word I'm looking for here?
Like the CIA was
Yeah, but
influencing
they were.
ASIO.
I think influencing would have been a soft word. The way that Whitlam was looking at this, and he wanted to reform that because he thought it was basically compromised, and so he demanded. I think this was in 72 or 73, something like that. He demanded a list of all of the CIA operatives that were operating in Australia, and nearly basically almost doxed them all, right? And this was a big problem for the U.S. and the CIA.
Yeah.
For many, many reasons, right? And so he's threatening to shut down the Pine Gap. This is really strategically important. He's messing with CIA operations. He's kind of going against a lot of the Vietnam initiatives. And he's just say whatever you want about him. I have no idea what his politics were.
U.S.
Yeah, exactly. I have no idea what his politics were. I don't know if he was a good or a bad prime minister, but the ultimate fate of Goff, that name here, was that Whitlam was removed from office by your governor.
It was a big scandal.
Yeah,
It's the first time it would happen. Yeah.
And so
the Governor General.
for this specific talk, Owen, I had to go back and do a little bit of research because I knew that he got booted, but I didn't understand the Australian mechanisms by which he got booted.
Yeah.
And so, tell me if I'm wrong on this one. Your Governor General is appointed by your prime minister. Basically, the prime
By
minister.
the Queen.
Well, right. The prime minister
Oh,
says,
yeah. So sorry.
Here's my guy for governor general, Queen. Do you like give me the thumbs up on this guy? And I'm told, generally you just get a yes from the Queen, like this.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Queen has never rejected the choice yet.
Right. So the first thing that I found, kind of as an American, right, like understanding, I was like, wait a minute. The Queen still, or in this case now, the King still has input. The Crown still has input on Australian politics at this high of a level. I was blown away. I thought y'all broke off from.
Yeah.
I thought y'all broke off from the UK a long time ago. Shit, I must have forgotten that part about history, which was wild. And the reason why I was so blown away by it is because I had no idea what the Governor General role was. Right. And I had no idea that he held this kind of giant veto power over your prime minister that legally constitutionally speaking, he can pull this. The governor general can pull this lever. The governor general is allowed, vis-a-vis the reserve powers, to dismiss a prime minister.
To be fair, they have to have some sort of excuse for it. And
excuse,
to finish off the story for the listeners, Well, so to finish off the story for the listeners, so it was the governor general, like an appointment of the British Crown, who ultimately pulled the pin. But the rumor is that it was initiated by the CIA.
That's right. So
So what ended up being the excuse was that the opposition leader, they blocked supply, basically the government money,
the federal budget, right?
Yeah, the government spending money on like keeping all its departments running.
Right.
So now that the government could no longer fund its departments, that created the scenario for the governor general to step in and kick out the government.
Right.
And then as well,
but he blindsided Gough, though. He blindsided him because obviously this was Gough's pick for the governor general, and he gave him no heads up, like, hey, I don't like how things are going. I might end up, dismissing you if you don't make these changes. He just said, out of nowhere, out of the blue one day, hey, you're out. And here's my reason why.
Oh, well,
right.
Sure, it would have been short notice, but yeah, we're talking days, not months, to your point.
Exactly. There was no warning, like, hey, I don't like where the country's going. I really don't want to use this reserve power. There was no dialogue, is what I'm saying, right? And so that raises a lot of suspicions, especially among you Aussies, about like, hey, well, that's a bit of a scandal, right? Here's an appointee from what I always thought was a foreign government, but the Crown, right, way on the other side of the world, right, Northern Hemisphere. And
the Queen later wrote a letter to the Governor General, essentially saying, thank you for basically doing all this on your own initiative, for not trying to
giving him
too much, because she doesn't want the blame. Queen Elizabeth doesn't want the blame for kicking out Gough Whitlam. She wants it all. She was very grateful that it's like, okay, all the blame's on the Governor General, not me.
Right. But, again, that's an incredibly important power to have. Like that's, we were just talking early on in the episode about what are the mechanisms to remove the U.S. president. And I'm like, basically, it's impossible, right? Especially in the political climate now, because you have to get a bunch of people to agree to it, right? That's our legal framework to do so. Yours is have an excuse and be the Governor General. Isn't that the most powerful position that you can have in Australia, technically, then?
Actually, Danny, maybe you're not aware of this other one. There are two incidents of two rumors where the CIA kicked out an Australian prime minister.
Oh, this happened more than once?
The first one. Yes.
Oh, man,
so
tell
the
me
second
about
one's not very well known. So Julia Gillard, in around 2013, she introduced, for instance, a mining tax. So to this day, Australian mining companies, fossil fuel companies pay very little tax. Sure. If you compare Australia versus Qatar, for instance, with our natural gas exports, it becomes so readily apparent how little tax we're collecting.
So Qatar collects more taxes on natural gas extraction than you do, is what you're saying.
I think something like 60 times as much, at least 10 times as much.
That's wild. Okay.
And so, so we could talk about that, but so she introduced a mining tax. She also introduced a carbon tax.
Okay.
Sorry, she started the process of introducing a carbon tax.
Okay.
And so all these mining companies digging up things in Australia, for some reason, Australians think that they're Australian owned or whatever. Actually, US shareholders make up a big portion of this. And so, with all the US lobbying that goes on, all these US shareholders were saying, we don't like the idea of this mining tax. That's cutting into our profits. You know, can you US lawmakers pull a few strings, get rid of Julia Gillard? And that's what happened. So she ended up being replaced by Kevin Rudd, the previous prime minister, who's also part of her
But
party.
who
And so,
did that? Was that the then current governor general that pulled the plug
no,
on
no,
it?
no, no. No, it was within the governing
I
party.
see. So
Everyone
they
at the
say they had a vote of
time,
no confidence.
uh, I don't, I don't know what you exactly call it, but like within the party itself, there was a vote like, let's have a new leader.
Okay. Yeah, that
And
I
so,
think that's called a vote of no confidence. So okay, they actually did
could be, yeah.
do okay. Well, I mean,
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, at the time, it was all seen as, Kevin Rudd, the previous, and then her replacement.
mhm,
So he's viewed essentially as like a narcissist.
okay.
And so everybody at the time thought of it, oh, this is some sort of, power trip for Kevin Rudd. That's all there is to it.
Hmm.
It's only years later that stuff started coming out about like, hang on, was this helped along? Was this desired by the CIA, by the Americans?
I think I don't know
And
much about the story. This is the first time I'm hearing about it, but just from calling balls and shots here, I feel like the more likely situation is that this is just like corporate lobbying at its finest, and less so CIA. There would have to be like some kind of
oh, yeah, sorry, not necessarily CIA, but definitely American intervention
sure.
in Australian politics.
Sure. Yeah. Without a doubt. I mean, you could look back to like South American, countries having like whole coup attempts because we wanted to make sure that U.S. sugar companies or U.S. fruit companies like Dole or
Yeah, yeah.
Domino, can extract the
The Republic. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Can extract maximum profits out of third party countries, and unfortunately for the rest of the world, like nobody is safe from the United States's grip there
Yeah, yeah.
because it's just such a. I mean, we're the largest economy in the world. We're powering, and we're the
Oh,
reserve
I'm
currency for the
trying
time
to,
being. Yeah.
yeah. Danny, we've been chatting a while, but before we wrap up though, I always like to play a game with
Okay.
uh the guests and that. It's a shame. You're going to be guessing a quote. The listeners are going to be guessing as well.
All right.
Unfortunately, you would know this quote, so I guess it's more for our listeners. And I was hoping Peter would guess it, but anyway. So to our listeners, and Danny, if you want to give them some hints to help them
Oh God,
guess,
I hope that I know what this quote
maybe.
is.
Well, yes. So, maybe not who the actual person was who said it, but at least what they're talking
Hmm.
about. So the quote goes, "They are beyond doubt the dirtiest, laziest, most degenerate and thievish race of men ever inhabiting this sphere. It makes you sick to inhabit the same island with them. They're even lower than Italians. What the island needs is not public health, but a tidal wave or something to totally exterminate the population. It might then be livable. I have done my best to further the process of extermination by killing off 8 and transplanting cancer into several more. The latter has not resulted in any fatalities so far." So, I guess the question to the listeners is, what was this island that this person's talking about? The island where the people are dirtier and lazier than Italians. Um,
I
and
think
who
I
said
think
it?
I've figured it out by process of elimination.
Oh wait, I thought you would know the quote pretty much verbatim, Danny. Okay.
No, I don't know it verbatim, but
Well, I have the story from
yeah, no,
you.
I know what you're
On
talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But yeah. So a clue to people. So this was set in
What's that
1932.
guy's name?
What island might they have been
Well,
talking
I haven't
about?
said it yet, but it's an island that I live on. Huge quote.
Yeah. So anyway, for listeners, this guy was talking about Puerto Rico.
Hmm.
Over the years, there's been quite a few independence movements in Puerto Rico.
Yep, that's right.
It's still many people, Americans included, are still unaware that actually, people who live on Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens, although they can't vote in various
That's
elections.
right.
And yeah, so this letter written in 1932. So this guy, Cornelius Rhodes, as his story alludes to,
Hmm.
he was a medical
Right.
physician.
Roads.
When
Hmm.
he he fled Puerto Rico immediately after this letter
Hmm.
because it was it was found by his housekeeper and then leaked. He was going to send it to an American colleague. Anyway, yeah, so he returned to the US and it was all just covered up, as though, oh, yeah, this was just a thought experiment, a joke, that sort of thing. He went on to become the director of some medical center, went through a successful career. One of these medical centers created some award named after him. It's only in 2002 that this scandal sort of resurfaced.
Right.
Someone who hadn't heard the original story, found the letter. And I think because the guy who found the letter in 2002, he was questioning, like, why do we have this medical award named after this guy?
Right.
What's his backstory? Finds his backstory and is horrified.
Yep.
So it's incredible that, like, I guess sort of why I decided to bring it up is, like, people seem to gloss over a lot of the sins committed by the US over the years, and that, even with all the US sins, they still try to tap into local grassroots movements. That's how powerful local grassroots movements are, and hence why you should be involved in one yourself. I guess.
Don't grassroots
Would you agree
movement.
with
Yes, unless you're grassroots movementing against the United States, in which case, and in the case of Puerto Ricans, after Cornelius Rhodes's own words, get bombed to smithereens, like quite literally. This was the one and only time that the U.S. actually bombed its own citizens. So.
Do you have anything to add to the Puerto Rico Cornelius Rhodes story, by the way?
Oh, man, we'll be here for another hour and a half. If you're really interested, here's my plug. You can listen to Bro History. We've got at least 2 episodes on the peculiar Puerto Rican history, including, stories about popular uprisings in Puerto Rico that got violently put down by the United States military. Even one time where they tried to assassinate the president of the United States. So pretty interesting stuff. I would listen to it.
Well, Danny, thanks a lot for your time today.
Of course.